The morning sun had just begun casting an almost artificial glow over the obsessively maintained lawns of Harmony Heights, turning them an unnatural shade of green. Harmony Heights. Just saying the name was enough to make you roll your eyes, especially if you knew the kind of petty dictatorship that thrived beneath those perfectly sculpted hedges. I was midway through my first cup of coffee, strong, black, and just bitter enough to keep me from crawling back into bed, when the knock came. We weren't expecting visitors. And in this neighborhood, an unannounced knock usually meant nothing good. 9 times out of 10, it was a misplaced Amazon package, a wandering lapdog, always some tiny, yappy thing, or, worst of all, Lisa Whitmore. I set my mug down with a sigh, the ceramic making a soft clink against the counter. Lisa Whitmore, self-proclaimed queen of the Homeowners Association, a woman whose very presence could curdle milk. I stretched, cracked my knuckles, and braced myself for whatever brand of nonsense she was about to deliver. When I swung the door open, my suspicions were instantly confirmed. There she stood, gripping a clipboard like it held the codes to a missile launch. Her lips were pursed so tightly they almost vanished, as if she'd just sucked on a lemon, or more likely, finished reviewing the HOA's sacred rulebook. "We need to talk," she announced, her voice oozing with that gratingly fake politeness that made your teeth hurt. I leaned against the doorframe, forcing a casual smirk, even though I could already feel my stomach twisting. "Karen," I said with a weary smile, "it's barely past 7. Whatever this is, it can wait." She ignored me, as expected. Lisa Caldwell wasn't one for pleasantries. She was a force of nature, and obstacles, like basic human courtesy, were things she plowed through without a second thought. She thrust a folded piece of paper into my hand. "Your brother is in violation of our HOA regulations," she declared, her voice sharpening. "If this continues, there will be consequences." That word, consequences, hung in the air like a threat delivered by a second-rate movie villain. I hadn't even unfolded the letter yet, but I already knew it wasn't going to be good. My brother David, a war veteran, was the so-called issue. As I unfolded the paper, I could feel a pit forming in my stomach. It was typed, of course, in that cold, official font that HOAs seem to think adds credibility to their absurdity. My eyes skimmed over the words, and I nearly choked on my own spit. "Mr. Jason Carter," I read aloud, my voice dripping with disbelief, "has been repeatedly observed wearing unauthorized attire within the neighborhood, specifically military camouflage. This disrupts the, wait for it, visual harmony of the community and may be intimidating to other residents." I blinked. "Read it again." "You're joking," I said, looking up at Karen, who remained as stone-faced as ever. "Very serious," she replied without missing a beat. I leaned back against the doorframe, shaking my head. "So you're telling me my brother, who just got back from serving his country, can't wear camo in his own driveway?" Karen's nose twitched, like the mere mention of country personally offended her. "It's not about him," she snapped. "It's about the rules. The HOA has clear guidelines ensuring a neutral, non-disruptive aesthetic in shared spaces." I took a slow, measured breath, trying to suppress the urge to laugh in her face. I'd heard plenty of HOA nonsense before, but this was a new level of ridiculous. "Karen," I said, rubbing my temples, "do you even know who my brother is?" "I don't care if he's the mayor," she shot back, eyes narrowing. "Rules are rules." That did it. I let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. If only she knew. Inside the house, Jason was in the kitchen, pouring himself a coffee. He heard the murmur of voices, the unmistakable edge in Karen's tone. A flicker of irritation crossed his face, a tightening around his eyes. He'd been home for less than a week, trying to settle back in, to decompress after everything. The last thing he needed was this kind of petty nonsense. I walked back inside, still chuckling darkly. "You're not going to believe this," I said, handing Jason the letter. He took it, scanning the page. The easy smile he'd slowly been reclaiming over the past few days faded. He exhaled through his nose, handed the paper back. "They have a problem with me wearing camo," he said flatly. It wasn't a question. "Oh, not just camo," I said, barely holding in my laughter. "You're apparently ruining the visual harmony of Harmony Heights." Jason tilted his head slightly, as if waiting for a punchline. When it didn't come, he simply nodded. All right. I frowned. That's it? Just all right. A slow smirk spread across his face. Oh, I'm gonna have fun with this. Meanwhile, out on her pristine front lawn, Lisa Caldwell seethed with righteous indignation. The blatant disregard for the HOA's authority, it was unacceptable. She yanked out her phone, fingers flying over the screen as she drafted a strongly worded email to the HOA board. This violation would not stand. Later that day, Jason was out back, grilling steaks. He moved with practiced efficiency, flipping the meat like he was handling a field operation. He was wearing camo pants and a plain black t-shirt. So these, he said, gesturing to his pants with the tongs as I handed him a beer, these are the problem? I took a swig. Apparently, they're a threat to the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. Jason snorted. I've dealt with warlords who had more flexibility. I grinned. I can't wait to see what you do. The next morning, I found Jason in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing his teeth. But it wasn't the routine that caught my attention. It was his outfit. Full military fatigues, tactical boots, even his beret. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. Really, Jason met my gaze in the mirror, a mischievous glint in his eye, toothbrush still in his mouth. Oh, it's war now. An hour later, he casually strolled out to check the mail, dressed like he was about to parachute into a combat zone. A few neighbors peeked through their blinds. Some looked amused. Others whispered among themselves in hushed concern. And then there was Karen, standing on her porch, clutching her phone like it was a loaded weapon. Mrs. Turner was in the middle of watering her petunias when she nearly lost her grip on the watering can. Across the street, Jason gave her a friendly wave. His face lit up with a wide grin. A pair of teenage boys, coasting by on their skateboards, came to an abrupt stop, exchanging whispers. Dude, is that an actual soldier? Meanwhile, Mr. Wallace, a retired accountant famous for his strict daily routine, ended up spilling his morning coffee as he watched Jason stroll past. From the comfort of my front porch, I took a slow sip of coffee, enjoying the spectacle unfolding before me. Then came Karen, storming across the street, her heels clicking furiously against the pavement. This is an escalation, she snapped, her face flushed with irritation. Jason turned to her, as if only just noticing her presence. Oh, I thought we were enforcing dress codes now. I gave a sharp twitch. This isn't funny. Jason nodded with an almost exaggerated seriousness. I completely agree. Dress code violations are no laughing matter. Karen, visibly shaking with frustration, pulled out her phone. I'm documenting this. Jason responded with a crisp, textbook military salute. Make sure to get my good side. That was the final straw. Lisa pivoted on her heel and marched off, furiously typing away on her phone. No doubt she was crafting yet another formal complaint, or maybe even drafting a new HOA rule specifically banning military personnel from dressing like, well, military personnel. I shook my head with a grin. You're playing a dangerous game, man. David's smile was effortless. You say dangerous, I say entertaining. Later that evening, an official letter from the HOA landed in my mailbox. This time, it wasn't just a warning. It was a formal notice of violation, complete with threats of escalating consequences. I read it aloud, then looked over at David, who was casually chewing on a steak. She's doubling down. Jason leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. Good. I raised an eyebrow. Good. Taking another bite, he chewed thoughtfully before answering. Because now I get to have some real fun. Lisa hadn't always been the iron-fisted ruler of Harmony Heights. 20 years ago, she was different, back when she was married to a soldier named Frank. He had deployed overseas and returned a changed man, distant and withdrawn. Their marriage fell apart, and Lisa was left bitter, not just toward Frank, but toward everything he represented. The rigid rules of the HOA, her obsessive control over the neighborhood, were her way of imposing order on a world that once felt chaotic and unfair. And that HOA treasury? Turns out, those homeowner fees weren't just going toward landscaping. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Chris, a neighbor and fellow member of our little resistance group. Dude, Your brother just walked into the grocery store looking like he's on a Black Ops mission. Lisa saw him. She's on the warpath. I grinned. I didn't even need details. I could already picture it. David, casually shopping for eggs and milk, dressed like he was about to take down an enemy compound. And Karen? She was probably on the verge of an aneurysm. That grocery store trip turned out to be quite the event. Lisa nearly had a meltdown right there in the produce section, ranting about community standards and how he was causing a scene. But then something unexpected happened. A man in the store recognized Jason from a news interview a while back. He shook David's hand, thanked him for his service. Karen's face twisted, like she'd just bitten into a lemon. Then she made her biggest mistake. She called store security. The security guys showed up, took one look at David, and, well, turns out one of them was a former soldier. The second he spotted David's unit patch, he snapped to attention and addressed him as Sir. Lisa stormed out after that. Later that night, Jason recounted the scene with a smug grin. She called security on me, and they ended up saluting instead. I burst out laughing. No way. Swear to God, Jason said, cracking open a bottle of water. And she's not done yet. That prediction was dead on. Another letter showed up, this one packed with legal jargon, an official warning from the HOA. I skimmed through it and let out a sigh. They're really going all in. David, unfazed, leaned back in his chair. Good. That's what makes it fun. I shook my head. You're enjoying this way too much. He flashed a lazy grin. Of course I am. This isn't a fight she can win. She just doesn't know it yet. Susan, Karen's closest ally and fellow HOA board member, was notorious for blindly backing Lisa no matter what. The HOA meeting room, a dull beige box designed to suppress any trace of individuality, was filled with tense energy. Lisa sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, her expression one of smug satisfaction. In front of her sat a neatly stacked pile of documents, her latest arsenal in this ridiculous war. Then Jason walked in, wearing his full military uniform. I followed him, taking a seat beside him. The room felt like a ticking bomb, everyone bracing for impact. Lisa cleared her throat, her voice sharp. Mr. Carter, we've come to a decision. Jason flashed a polite smile. Oh, please enlighten me. With a triumphant smirk, Lisa slid a paper across the table. You are officially being fined for noncompliance with HOA regulations. If you refuse to pay, we will pursue further legal action. Susan, for once, hesitated. That won't hold up, she muttered, only to be swiftly silenced by Karen's glare. Jason glanced at the document, then leaned back, the picture of unbothered confidence. You do realize I'm active duty military, right? Lisa scoffed. That doesn't exempt you from our neighborhood's rules. Jason nodded. You're right, it doesn't. But you know what it does exempt me from. Lisa blinked, momentarily thrown. Jason casually pulled out his phone, scrolled for a moment, and then turned the screen around. A video played, a clip from a government website explaining a federal law that explicitly protected active military personnel from housing discrimination, including HOA policies that unfairly targeted service members. The room went dead silent. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. That's irrelevant. Jason raised an eyebrow. A federal law is irrelevant. Lisa straightened in her seat, doubling down. We are an independent homeowners association. Our regulations are legally binding. Jason took a slow sip of water. His own, of course. No, they're not. Not when they violate federal law. Karen's eye twitched. Mr. Henderson, a nervous-looking board member, cleared his throat. Karen, did we actually check this before issuing the fine? Lisa shot him a withering glare. This is about maintaining community standards. I grinned. Pretty sure federal law outranks the HOA handbook. Mrs. Rodriguez, another board member, let out a heavy sigh. Karen, I don't think we can actually enforce this. Karen's face turned a dangerous shade of red. This is an internal matter, Jason said with a smirk. Not anymore. He leaned back, his tone casual but firm. See, I made a call last night to a friend of mine. He works with the legal team over at the base, and let's just say they're very interested in what's going on here. Karen's mouth opened and closed, like a fish struggling for air. You called a military lawyer? Jason gave a nonchalant shrug. Figured if you were gearing up for a legal fight, I should come prepared. Then he dropped the real bombshell. Lowering his voice, steady and deliberate, he added, and from what I hear, the HOA's financials aren't exactly spotless. Karen's face drained of color. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. What are you talking about? She stammered. Jason leaned in slightly. Let's just say someone's been dipping into the HOA funds for personal use. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, his voice uncertain. I think it might be best if we just let this go. Lisa spun on him, her voice rising with frustration. You're backing down? We can't just let this slide. I decided it was time to step in. Karen, let me ask you something. If this actually goes to court and you lose, what do you think happens next? Her jaw tightened, but before she could answer, Jason filled in the blanks for her. It means every single one of these complaints gets thrown out. And worse for you? There could be serious legal consequences for targeting an active duty officer, not to mention potential fraud charges. A single bead of sweat trickled down Karen's forehead. Mrs. Rodriguez cleared her throat and spoke with newfound authority. Karen, I move that we table this discussion and drop all charges against Mr. Carter. Seconded. Mr. Henderson chimed in a little too quickly. Reynolds hesitated, but finally nodded in agreement. Lisa looked ready to explode. Her grip on the stack of papers in front of her tightened until her knuckles went white. But she wasn't stupid. She knew she'd lost. After a long, tense pause, she exhaled sharply. Fine. Jason smiled. I appreciate your cooperation. Lisa shot up from her chair so fast it nearly toppled over. Without another word, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The remaining board members sat there in awkward silence. Then Mr. Henderson sighed. Well, that was something. Jason stood, shaking a few hands. Hopefully, we can all work together a little better from now on. As we left the meeting hall, I turned to Jason with a grin. So does this mean we won? Jason smirked. We won this round. I raised an eyebrow. You think she's going to pull something else? Oh, without a doubt, he said. People like Lisa don't just give up. And, of course, he was right. Over the next few days, she threw everything she could at us. Passive-aggressive emails, ridiculous flyers about proper neighborhood attire, even stopping random neighbors to rant about protecting community values. But none of it mattered. The board had spoken. She'd lost. Then, one evening, as Jason and I sat out on the porch, we saw it, a moving truck. Lisa was packing up. I blinked in disbelief. No way. Jason smirked. Told you she'd dig her own grave. We watched as she barked orders at the movers, her face twisted in frustration. Then she saw us. For a brief moment, our eyes met. I gave her a little wave. David, ever the professional, just nodded. Lisa muttered something under her breath and stomped back inside. Reynolds was nowhere to be seen. I shook my head, still trying to process it. I can't believe it. She's actually leaving. Jason stretched, looking completely unsurprised. She made herself unwelcome. This was inevitable. As the sun dipped below the horizon, something about the neighborhood felt lighter, quieter, like a storm had finally passed. Lisa Whitmore's reign was officially over. That weekend, Jason threw a barbecue, a celebration, a chance for the neighborhood to finally come together after all the nonsense. For the first time, people started sharing their own HOA horror stories, laughing about things they'd been too afraid to speak up about before. I nudged David. You realize this is going to turn into one of those legendary neighborhood tales, right? Jason smirked. Good. So what now? I asked. He took a slow sip of his beer. Now, I finally get to relax. Maybe that was just wishful thinking. In a place like Harmony Heights, there was always another Lisa waiting in the wings. But for now, peace had returned. Thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe.